Cooper versus Anderson. There was nothing remarkable about the way that Debbie Anderson and Jeff Cooper met. Jeff, 17, sandy haired and baby faced, was a senior at a public high school in Houston, Texas. I guess I considered myself as hanging out with one of the in crowds, he said. We were interested in having fun. Although I did keep up my grades and do well, we mostly just hung out with friends. Debbie, age 19, was tall and lean with long brown hair and was a senior at a local Catholic high school, a Catholic girls' school. And she was an average student, but she excelled in extracurricular activities. Elected to the school's homecoming court, she was also a cheerleader and an all state volleyball player. It was May of 1985, nearing graduation, and summer, a time of celebration, parties, and prom. At one of the graduation parties in Houston, Debbie was introduced to Jeff by a mutual friend. Nor was there anything remarkable about the relationship that developed between Debbie and Jeff. Debbie had dated often throughout high school, but had not yet had a sexual relationship. She says that as soon as she met Jeff, she thought he was wonderful and gentlemanly, and a few days later invited him to her senior prom. Jeff had also dated throughout high school, having had a few sexual relationships and one longtime girlfriend. He says that Debbie hadn't called if Debbie hadn't called about prom, he never would have given her another thought. But once she called, he was happy to go. He picked her up at her house, met her mother, and escorted Debbie to the prom. Jeff and Debbie slept together that night, and the next day Debbie confided to her best friend that she had lost her virginity to Jeff Cooper. Debbie and Jeff talked on the phone and saw each other about 8 or 10 times over the next couple of months. Sometimes, if a friend's parents were out of town, they would go to that house to make love. Debbie says that Jeff was always polite, a gentleman. She thought she was falling in love. Jeff, on the other hand, says, I felt like the relationship was strictly casual sex, and, in my opinion, there were no ties. When I look back, Debbie says now, he was acting like he was interested, but he wasn't really interested. When you look back, you can see, but she could not see it then, and Jeff was content with the way things were going. Nothing unusual, he says, just a typical relationship that a lot of other friends had, he said. The remarkable thing about Jeff and Debbie's relationship occurred on the night of August 10, 1985, one day shy of Jeff's 18th birthday. Debbie had invited Jeff to attend a wedding with her. He declined, but the two had plans to meet later that night. Jeff was hanging out at a friend's house with a group of 10 or 12 other boys, drinking beer and shooting pool. When the kids' parents go out of town, all the kids end up at that house for the weekend, Jeff explains. So I knew Kevin Baker's parents were out of town, and quite honestly, I saw it as an opportunity. The group was going to go out anyway, so Jeff asked if he and Debbie could use the house. Kevin said okay. Then Kevin said he would like to set up a video camera. Jeff recalls Kevin said, Sure, I'd like to tape it, or I want to video it, or something like that. And I said, sure, whatever. And with that, the boys decided to videotape Debbie and Jeff making love without Debbie's knowledge. Jeff went to pick up Debbie at the reception. Kevin got out the family recorder. He and two of the other boys at the house then proceeded to tape an introduction to the video that they were about to make. Laughing and joking and hollering, they described in crude and graphic terms what they expected to capture on tape. Acting as MCs to an entertainment event, they described what Debbie, as an unwitting participant, was going to do and what would be done to her. There were lots of people in that house that night who knew what was going on, Jeff said. They were all peers of mine, and not one of them thought, Bing, wait, we're making a mistake. Somebody stop. Instead, Kevin hid the video recorder in a closet of his bedroom with the camera on, the lens facing the bed. Jeff met Debbie at a wedding reception. He says that she thought that they were going to go to a get-together at Jeff's friend's house, but when they got to the house, no one was there. So instead, the two had a beer and chatted a while. Then Jeff led Debbie to Kevin's room, where they had sex under the blankets of the bed. Debbie had no idea that the video camera was recording them. Jeff later drove Debbie home and returned to the Baker house. The others had already come back. When Jeff walked in, there were 10 or 12 high school boys partying, having a good time, watching the tape. Jeff watched with them, then took the tape when he left. Within a week or two, both Debbie and Jeff were off at college. Jeff went to the University of Texas in Austin, Debbie to Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos, about 30 miles from Austin. Her two best friends, Judy Paulo and Stacy Romano, went there as well. Debbie brought pictures of Jeff to college with her, still considering him to be a boyfriend and hoping to pursue a relationship. She called him a few times from her dorm and even ran into him when she visited UT on weekends, but Jeff acted cold towards her. Debbie soon realized that he was not interested. Debbie didn't know about the video's existence, much less that the word of the episode had already begun to spread. Jeff's high school friends had, of course, seen the tape right away. In addition, Jeff had pledged to the fraternity at UT and told some of the fraternity brothers what he had done. He showed the tape at 3 different friends' apartments, each time to a different group of male friends and fraternity brothers. And there were many more people who wanted to see it. There were lots of others who would have loved to have been there, but they weren't, Jeff said. Guys were calling that I know. Guys in other fraternities heard about it and wanted me to bring it over and show them. I said, look, leave it alone. You can't see anything. By all accounts, the tape was of poor quality, dark, shadowy, and fuzzy. In the section in the bedroom, at least, it was difficult to discern much detail. It was very hard to see, Jeff said. I maybe helped to focus it in on the picture of what it was I was showing them. There were a couple funny things involved, but you couldn't really see anything. Still, everyone knew who was on the tape, and the word was out. Although Jeff's college in Austin and Debbie's college in San Marcos and their hometown of Houston were all separated by many miles, this kind of news transcended geographic boundaries. One of Debbie's friends says simply, everybody knew, everybody. Well, at that point, everybody but Debbie and her closest friends. Then on December 6, Debbie, Judy, and Stacy traveled to UT to attend a big fraternity and sorority rush parties on campus. There, another of Debbie's high school friends, Gail Gammon, came up to her and told her to stay away from Jeff. Debbie wanted to know why. She didn't want to tell me, Debbie recalls. She just kept saying, don't talk to him, don't go see him, don't anything. I kept asking why, but she wouldn't tell me. And this went on for 5 minutes. Debbie kept insisting on an explanation, and Gail finally told Debbie about the videotape. I didn't believe her at first, Debbie said, but Gail told her how many people had either seen or heard about it, and Debbie froze. For a few minutes she just stood there, unable to say or do anything. I was furious and upset and hurt and in shock, Debbie said. She finally decided that she had to confront Jeff, so she, Judy, and Stacy went to his fraternity. I wasn't in very good shape at that point, Jeff recalls. It was a rush party, and I was pretty drunk. I didn't want to deal with it. He told Debbie that he was sorry and he had not meant to hurt her. He also told her it was no big deal and to go away. Debbie's friends tried to talk with him, but did not get much further than Debbie had, so the girls eventually just drove back to school at San Marcos. But Debbie did not stay there long. She was reeling. Her first sexual relationship had ended not only in betrayal, but also in public humiliation. She imagined all the young men that she knew seeing her naked in the act of love, and she was unbearably embarrassed. She was also beginning to feel an anger, rage really, that she had never felt before. That night, Debbie said she could not sleep and could not stop crying. She could not reach Jeff by telephone either. She finally decided that she had to go back to UT and get the tape. Debbie, Judy, and Stacy again made their way back to Austin. When they arrived at Jeff's apartment, he was at the library. In a telephone conversation with a friend, he found out that Debbie was looking for him, so he stayed away most of the night. I just didn't want to deal with it, he said. I stayed at a friend's house until 2 or 3 in the morning, and then decided they have to have gone by now. When Jeff approached his apartment, there was no sign of Debbie or her friends, so Jeff pulled into the parking space. But then Debbie pulled in right behind him. The girls had been waiting around the corner. When Debbie confronted Jeff about the tape, he apologized to her again and said he would destroy it. Debbie said that wasn't enough, that she wanted the tape. Jeff kept promising to destroy it, but Debbie wanted to make absolute certain that it was out of circulation. I also wanted to see what everyone else was seeing, she said. Jeff finally reached into a compartment in his car and brought out the tape, apologizing again. Then he gave it to Debbie, and for the second time he did not realize the enormity of his action or the consequences. After the confrontation with Debbie, Jeff merely assumed that the whole incident was over and basically forgot about it. Debbie says She too tried to forget, but could not. It, it was the end of the semester, and finals were coming. I don't remember anything except sitting in my room and crying and rocking back and forth, she says. I don't remember taking one final. She would find out later that she failed every single one of her tests. Debbie went home for Christmas, and her parents immediately became concerned about her appearance and behavior. Debbie's parents had been divorced since she was 8. She and her two sisters lived primarily with their mother, but saw their father and stepmother who lived nearby quite often. In fact, Debbie was supposed to do some data processing work at her father's manufacturing plant over the holidays, excuse me. Both Debbie's mother and father noticed that their daughter was uncharacteristically sullen and withdrawn. When they asked what was wrong, she told them not to worry. For most people, there comes a time when they realize that they are looking at the world in a different way, with a little less trust and a little more cynicism than they had when they were younger. Usually, it's a gradual process, one that is hardly noticed, until eventually they look back and realize that they had once been much more innocent, more naive. Debbie says she can point to the very moment in her life when she lost that sense of innocence. She says finding out about the tape changed her forever. At the time, however, she merely tried to get through each day and did not do it very well. Although she had viewed the tape and now knew that it was not as revealing as she had feared, she was still angry and felt a deep sense of betrayal and shame. Her feelings of rage and humiliation were beginning to overwhelm her. First, she had a terrible fight with her mother. It was over something insignificant, like being late for a wedding, Faye Anderson, her mother said. She was just undeniably out of control. Debbie didn't attend the wedding, and when Faye returned from the celebration, she found a note from Debbie saying that she had left home. She had never, ever happened before, Faye said. Debbie lived first at Judy's house, then another friend's, Lucy Brown. She tried to go back to work for her father, but she was distracted and would cry during the day, and she drank and had trouble sleeping at night. Judy, Stacy, and Lucy were calling all the time to check on her. Debbie's father, Walt, says, I decided I needed to have a serious confrontation with her. Walt Anderson called his daughter into his office and closed the door. I told her, You're not going to leave until you tell me what's bothering you. He asked Debbie if she had flunked out of school, if she was on drugs, if she had been raped or physically assaulted in any way. Debbie just started crying again, told her father to leave her alone, and fled. Walt Anderson was still in his office trying to decide what to do when the telephone rang. It was Judy Paulo. She told Walt that Debbie was at her mother's house and that he should come right away. Apparently, Judy had decided that her friend needed help, and if Debbie could not tell her parents herself, Judy would do so for her. Walt went to the front door of the house, he recalls, to find Debbie sitting on the couch with her knees up, rocking back and forth and sobbing quietly. Judy Paulo was there, and she was crying. Sally, my younger daughter, was there, and she was crying. At first, no one seemed able to talk. Then, Walt says, Judy just kind of blurted out that a film had been made of Debbie making love to a boy. I went over to Debbie and got her to stand up, and we just held each other. I tried to calm her down a little. Then I got my younger daughter, and we all huddled together. There was very little discussion, actually. Debbie's mother and her older sister soon returned to the house. Walt took each of them aside and explained to them what had happened. Debbie was unable to do so herself, Faye recalls. She couldn't talk that night because everybody was so upset. It was just mass hysteria and hurt. We think our daughters are fragile and need our protection, Debbie's father says. I felt a great sense of wanting to take the hurt. I felt like I had somehow not protected her, that I should have. Within a week, I had gone out and purchased a gun. That Christmas holiday, the Anderson family was in turmoil. There wasn't 1 minute when somebody wasn't crying, or somebody wasn't totally outraged, or somebody wasn't hurt, and somebody wasn't always trying to stay next to Debbie because we didn't know what was going to happen, Faye says. We had never experienced anything like this before. She was a whole person at one time, and she was not a whole person now. We didn't know what the magnitude of what had happened was, and we didn't know where to find out about it. She wasn't a rape victim. What do you do? Where do you go? Debbie's stepmother finally got the name of psychotherapist, and Debbie went for counseling. Her parents and sister also went to a session with her. Walt says he decided to put the gun away, and by the time winter break ended in late January, Debbie felt ready to go back to school. I elected to try to forget about it, to just move on with my life, she says. However, Debbie soon found out that it was not going to be easy to do so. Everyone would look at me. Everyone would ask me questions, she explains. Some of the people who approached Debbie were her friends, some were acquaintances, others complete strangers. Some knew the truth and some had assumed that Debbie had volunteered to be taped. It got to the point where Debbie says, I didn't want to tell anyone my name when I met them. She says that there was no getting away from it. Debbie was no longer known as the cheerleader, the volleyball player, the homecoming queen. She was the girl in the videotape. Even her good friend Lucy Brown says, when you think of Debbie Anderson, you think of the videotape. I know I do. I try not to, but it's all I can think of. And when Debbie and Jeff's peers thought of the taping, what they felt was not outrage at Jeff Cooper, but revulsion towards Debbie Anderson. Of his acquaintances, Jeff says, I can tell you none of them thought it was bad. I guess they thought it was kind of a novelty. I've always said I've never lost a friend because of this. Instead, Debbie was the one who became branded. All of my girlfriends went the other way except my 3 closest friends, says Debbie. People would confront me and confront my friends. Stacy Romano was informed by 6 girls we knew in high school that she shouldn't be seen with me because I had a reputation of being a porno queen. People didn't want to have anything to do with me anymore. She was an outcast, says Lucy. Finally, Debbie came to the conclusion that she couldn't sweep it under the rug. She now wanted to take action. She wanted to let people know that she was not willingly participating in the tape. She also wanted to prevent it from happening to someone else. I have a little sister who could not, I don't think, handle something like this, she explains. And the whole thing just wasn't right. Everybody was laughing at me, and he looked like a big hero. It made me bad. The next time Debbie went home from school, she looked for a lawyer. Her father contacted his business attorney, who said he did not think there was any legal action for Debbie to take. Debbie and her mother went to see several lawyers who specialized in criminal areas, including the local district attorney, but they all said the same thing. What happened to Debbie was not a crime. Finally, Debbie's godfather came up with the name of an old fraternity brother who practiced law, including the law of torts. Debbie went to see her godfather's friend, Ken Birch. Debbie was the most devastating, despondent client I have ever had, reports Ken Birch. She almost couldn't tell her story to me. Ken advised Debbie that she might well have a case for invasion of privacy and infliction of emotional distress. But he also advised her that if she was going to file a lawsuit and testify at a trial, that she would have to forego whatever privacy she had left. Debbie thought about it and concluded that she had to take action. She reasoned that she had already been humiliated. She returned to Ken Birch and told him that she wanted to file a lawsuit. Ken enlisted the help of a friend, Dick Morrison, and later Morrison's law partner, Ronnie Christ. Morrison and Christ are attorneys in the Texas cowboy mold, outfitted in studded boots and ready with a colorful phrase, but they are no simple country lawyers. Both are seasoned tort attorneys. They generally take personal injury cases on a contingency fee. That is, rather than charge clients an hourly fee, they receive a percentage of the damages paid to their clients as a result of the lawsuit. Their clients do not pay the lawyers unless damages are awarded. Contingency fee attorneys absorb the cost of the trial and assume the risk that no money will be paid. If money is paid, however, the attorneys get a sizable chunk, often 30 to 40%. Thus, attorneys like Dick Morrison and Ronnie Christ do not usually take cases unless they think there's a good chance of winning substantial damages for their clients. On behalf of Debbie Anderson, they filed a lawsuit alleging invasion of privacy and negligent infliction of emotional distress. They named Jeff Cooper, along with Kevin Baker, Wynn Wilcox, J.R. Talbot, all who appeared in the introduction to the tape. They also named Kevin's older brother Ken, who was in the house at the time and is mentioned on the tape, although he does not appear in it. None of the other boys who were at the Baker house that night was named in the complaint. There's a lot of people that don't realize how lucky they are, Jeff says now, looking back at the trial. At first, taking legal action only made things worse for Debbie. Once word out of the lawsuit got around, people stopped talking to her altogether. Gail Gammon suddenly could not recall that she had been the first person to tell Debbie about the tape. and Lucy Brown had a confrontation with Jeff and J.R. Talbot in a restaurant. Lucy said it ended with the boys taunting her for being Debbie's friend and throwing a drink on her. According to J.R., I kind of spilled my drink on her. In any event, it was clear that the boys did not yet understand the seriousness of what had happened. Debbie's attorney, however, knew a major tort suit when he saw one. I always felt that we would get money, recalls Dick Morrison. We always had confidence there, said Ronnie Crist. Always. At first glance, Debbie's case may not have seemed particularly promising. She had been emotionally distressed, not physically injured, and the people she was suing were all just out of high school. Usually, jurors don't want to give a lot of money against teenagers, says Chris. They're not what we call target defendants. This wasn't Exxon. This wasn't some big company. It was a bunch of kids, so that would hold damages down. But Chris reasoned what would keep the amount of damages high was the quality of the plaintiff. When Chris and Morrison first interviewed Debbie, they could not believe their luck. She was a Sally Field look-alike. She was an all-state volleyball player. She was a cheerleader at a Catholic girls' school. We literally had an all-American girl. Just as important, they also had the videotape. If that tape had been destroyed, the case would have been worthless, Chris said candidly. As it was, though, we couldn't argue this case as well as the defendants did for us on the tape. Unaccountably, even once the lawsuit was underway, some of the boys didn't get it. The defendants, along with their fathers and attorneys, all showed up at Ken Birch's office to view the videotape. As the tape played, showing the three boys describing in graphic terms what was going to happen to Debbie, Kevin Baker, seated next to her father, was laughing. When Debbie's attorney asked Kevin why he laughed at the tape, he said, "It amused me." When Kevin's brother Ken was asked in his deposition if he had any remorse, he replied, "The only remorse I have is because I've been sued." Debbie's attorney could barely contain their glee. The case just kept getting better. They sued the five defendants for $3 million in actual damages and $9 million in punitive damages, a total of $12 million each. The trial began on May of 1989, nearly 4 years after the videotaping. The participants, who at the time had been boys and girls graduating from high school, were now young men and women graduating from college. Local media coverage was intense. The judge moved the trial to the largest courtroom available, but still could not accommodate everyone. The parties themselves took up a lot of space. Debbie Anderson was at the plaintiff's table with her three attorneys. The five defendants, Jeff Cooper, Wynn Wilcox, J.R. Talbot, and Kevin and Ken Baker, were each there with their own attorneys. All the parties' families and friends were packed into the front rows. A jury of 7 women and 5 men were impaneled. Ronnie Crist opened the trial with the most powerful way he could. He played the tape. Actually, he didn't play the entire tape, only the introduction, arguably the most damaging segment. All parties agreed that, in the interest of both Debbie and Jeff's privacy, the second half of the tape would not be played in open court. The jury would be given the tape and a VCR for use in the jury room during deliberations. The tape, having spoken for itself, Debbie's attorney spent most of the trial trying to show that, as a result of the taping, Debbie's reputation had been terribly damaged and that she had suffered awful emotional distress. Several of Debbie's friends testified about her good reputation before the incident. They repeated that, in contrast, Debbie was now branded as an outcast and a porno queen. Sister Jane even came, Dick Morrison recalls. Sister Jane Meyer was the principal at Debbie's Catholic high school. She testified at length about Debbie's outstanding achievements at school and her reputation for chastity, brushing aside questions from the defense attorney about the Catholic Church's view of premarital sex. Sister Jane declared that, in a sacred moment which Debbie entered into an act of love, she was violated and exploited by a despicable act. The defense attorneys then left Sister Jane's testimony alone. The defense offered depositions from other students who indicated that Debbie's reputation had not really been harmed because it was not that sterling to begin with. The most damning testimony came from Gail Gammon, the friend who now could not recall that she was the one who originally alerted Debbie to the existence of the tape. Parts of Gail's deposition were too graphic to be read into the record, but she concluded that Debbie's reputation was not any worse as a result of the videotape. More people, including including Debbie's mother and father, and Debbie herself testified to the dramatic change in her personality since she found out about the videotape. Before December of '85, they said Debbie was outgoing, self confident, a leader, a girl with goals and a sparkle in her eyes. Her many athletic awards were ticked off. She not only was an All American volleyball player, but she had been elected captain of by her teammates. When she had to choose between volleyball and cheerleading for a nearby boys' school, she chose volleyball, then promptly joined the Spirit Club so she could continue to root for the brothers' school team. The boys at the school responded by electing Debbie to their homecoming court. In short, Debbie says she was on top of the world. Then each witness described the change in Debbie after she found out about the videotape. Then she became withdrawn, depressed, and mistrustful. They testified that she did not socialize nearly as much as she did before and seemed unable to make new friends. Debbie said that she had trouble sleeping and experienced stomachache and dizziness. She said her grades had suffered as a result, eventually prompting her to transfer to a different school. Debbie stated that the betrayal and humiliation of the taping had finally changed her forever. Even now, she said, she worries about the future and how she would explain the incident to a husband, to a child. On cross-examination, the defense attorneys tried to show that there was an alternative explanation for some of Debbie's problems. Debbie's parents admitted on cross-examination that Debbie had always had trouble with school and barely maintained a C average. The defense brought up that Debbie had a lifelong problem with her hip and sinuses, and at least one occasion, serious problems with her stomach when she was 12. She also had missed an unusual number of days in school. The defense asked about the trauma Debbie suffered because of her parents' divorce at age 8, and, more recently, because of a car accident. With every question, the defense attorney suggested that not all of Debbie's woes could be blamed on the videotape. Indeed, the defense argued that Debbie's distress over the tape was not even that severe. Witnesses testified that within months of finding out about the tape, Debbie entered into a long-term sexually active relationship and that she later had 2 other such relationships. The defense also argued that Debbie's grades at the new school were among the best that she had ever received. Finally, there were dueling expert witnesses in the field of psychology who debated whether Debbie was suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome or merely just a little depressed. The most dramatic testimony came from each of the defendants, now young men in their 20s, who also took the stand. At long last, they understood the gravity of the lawsuit. Their pretrial cockiness was gone, or, as Dick Morrison describes it, once we got them down there at the courthouse and put the blowtorch on their ass, then it was a different story. Each of the defendants said that they were truly sorry for their role in the taping and for any harm that had caused Debbie. JR even apologized directly to Debbie from the stand. But Ronnie Chris kept after JR, asking him about the time he'd thrown a drink on Debbie's friend, hammering away about Kevin Baker laughing at the tape, and Ken Brown saying that his only regret that was he was being sued. Over and over, Chris recounted the defendants' actions in the years after the taping. Pointedly and effectively, he asked each one of the men, "Now, when exactly did this flood of remorse wash over you?" It was really a lot of fun, Chris says. It really was. It was just fun. This is not to say that none of the defendants regretted their participation in the taping. I would be as insensitive as they were, Ronnie Chris says, if I told you with a straight face that Jeff Cooper didn't suffer from this. One of the accused was such an idiotic little ignorant son of a bitch that he didn't have enough sense to know he had been proven to be that. But Jeff Cooper, he was the best of the bunch. Debbie agrees that Jeff was the best of them all. When he was barbecued in the courtroom for a week, Ronnie Chris says, the guy suffered. He was downright regretful for what he had done. Indeed, by the time of the trial, Jeff Cooper was fully aware of the trouble that he had caused Debbie, himself, and his family. He took the stand, apologized for his actions, and said that he could see that he had harmed Debbie. He admitted to everything that he had done, from making the tape to showing it to his friends. He only hesitated when asked whether he had sexually exploited Debbie Anderson. So Ronnie Chris got out a dictionary definition of exploited and marched through every possible definition. Here's what he questioned him on the tape. Question: Was the tape utilized by you? Answer, yes, sir. Question, you used it? Answer, yes, sir, I used it. And you misused it? Yes, sir, I misused it. And you walked all over Miss Anderson by using it without her consent? That is correct. You deceived her? Yes, sir, I did. You beguiled her? Yes, sir. You deluded her? Yes, sir. You hoodwinked her? Yes, sir. You duped her, pulled something over her? Yes, sir. Fooled her? Yes, sir. She didn't have any knowledge of it. After having gone over every aspect of the definition of exploitation, do you agree that this is a case involving sexual exploitation? After going over that, I agree. By the end of the testimony, Jeff Cooper was weeping on the stand, and it wasn't fake, says Christ. Just before the case was submitted to the jury, two things happened. First, Ken Baker was dismissed from the suit because, though he had been present in the house that night, he had not actively participated in making the videotape. Second, and much more important, Debbie's attorney dropped the invasion of privacy claim, leaving only the claim of negligent infliction of emotional distress. The question to the jury was, did the defendants negligently inflict emotional distress upon Debbie Anderson? And in less than a day, the jury answered yes by a vote of 10 to 2. Of the 7 women and 5 men jury, all the women and 3 of the men voted in Debbie's favor. The jury awarded $500,000 in actual damages and $500,000 in punitive damages. Of the total $1 million in damages, the jury assessed $650,000 against Jeff Cooper, $200,000 against Kevin Baker, $75,000 each against Wynn Wilcox and J.R. Talbot. Jeff says he was flabbergasted by the amount of the jury award. Debbie Anderson was hurt, he says. She deserves some type of damages. There's no question in my mind. But $1 million, I didn't think that was a fair judgment. Okay, and that's pretty much it. The case goes a little longer, but it's talking about how that would be awarded. So we're going to stop here